you ever wish your day wasn't dictated by your health? Are you tired of being tired all the time, or is pain holding you back from enjoying your time with your family? Would you like to manage your symptoms holistically, but you just don't know where to begin? I am so excited that you're here. This podcast will help you understand how natural remedies work so you can relieve your symptoms and live a fuller life. My name is Penny. I'm an occupational therapist, past pharmaceutical rep, a mom, and a wife with a strong faith, and for 25 years, I battled through debilitating Crohn's disease. I took all the medicine and did all the surgeries that stole so much time with my family, but never truly healed me. I finally realized if I was going to survive this disease, I needed to open my stubborn eyes to alternative solutions. I researched how perfectly our bodies work with plants and a lifestyle that made my health less of a burden to my family and aligned so beautifully with my faith and my medical training. If you are ready to reclaim your life with holistic options that are easy to implement as a busy mom and provide relief that lasts, this is the podcast for you. Hey there, Becoming Natural friends. Apologies for the delay in posting this episode. I was the lucky parent between my husband and I managing the senior trip to the Dominican with 200 plus senior boys and girls last week. I had great intentions of hibernating in my room and catching up on so many things, and I made it all the way to the airport where I met two moms that I loved and didn't get anything completed that I planned. So, life. This whole podcast is about being a mom and being authentic. So that's where I've been. However, I do plan to drop 2 episodes this week to make up for it, as I was able to write on my travel days. I just couldn't record. I certainly missed my little podcast routine and my world, working on all the exciting things that I have in store for becomingnatural.com. I just wish that I had an admin or someone who would do all the things that I need to get done, but I am a one-man show. So getting started, today is episode 26, How a Devoted Faith Led to Miraculous Healing from Sepsis. So this is supposed to be part 2 of my mother's insistence to read the blogs, Penny. We want to hear the miracle stories. I've tried to creatively impart some of our best miracles into this, but ultimately, they just need to be read from my heart at the time. This is not my norm. I should call these special editions, but if my mama wants me to read the blog posts, I am going to read the blog posts. They do capture the emotions, the miracles, and possibly in part how desperate we were at the time for answers, for healing, for prayer, for God. We needed some Jesus big time. As I have gone through my old blog and pulled out the most meaningful posts from that time, I just don't think reading straight through all the stories in one podcast will be as powerful or as meaningful. So while the future episodes might be shorter, you just might be praising the Lord for fewer words, I have decided to focus on one amazing story at a time. And I fully recognize that each story may seem to be small to you or less significant to anyone that was not in the midst of the desperation that we felt at the time. However, the bigger moral to that story is that we all have miracles going on around us every day. All of us, you, me, your friends, your family. You don't have to be sick or suffering to have miracles going on around you. And I like to call many of them my God winks. Some call them their angels. Others give credit to a lost loved one that appears in their life in some way. Ultimately, I think we are just too busy to see them. We need to keep our eyes peeled. And as I tell my boys over and again, have an attitude of gratitude and call out the moments that you are grateful for in the day. Maybe it was making the stoplight so you weren't late to your appointment, or hearing a phrase that a loved one used to say all the time and taking you back in time. That's a gift. Maybe it was a much bigger avoidance of an accident that you have no explanation for how in the world you avoided that accident. If we just keep calling out our grateful moments, we quickly realize that many little miracles going on around us by simply holding on to the awareness, paying attention, thinking critically, or as my pilot dad would say, situational awareness. The difference for us in the hospital was we were looking for miracles. We were seeking miracles. We were waiting for God to act. We were expecting miracles. We were not distracted. We were locked in and ready. I was stuck in a hospital bed specifically from May 4th to July 17th, and even beyond while recovering at home with 3 more surgeries to follow, and then prior to that being super sick that even got me to that point. When this awful season was finally over, to look back over everything that we endured as a family, there is no doubt I was surrounded by armies of angels. So tying in my passion for sharing the faith piece to my ultimate healing, while also sharing how I coped with a debilitating disease for so many years and how I have learned to treat my body in a whole new way, I have to regularly remind myself, and I think it's important to remind you, that I prayed for every bit of this story. It's an awful story. It sounds that way, but I prayed for it. I didn't pray to be miserable. I didn't pray to be in pain, near death, away from my family, or to disrupt the lives of everyone that loved me. But if you listen to my first few episodes, you know I panicked when I was asked to share my testimony. I didn't have anything to share, or I didn't think I had anything to share. I was also very consumed by a thought in my Bible study that challenged me to find my life's purpose. I don't know about you, but I didn't sit around and ponder what my life's purpose was going to be. I was just getting through a day at a time as a young mom, raising 3 adorable rugrats, and trying to live without pain with a brutal disease. I was on a mission to just be normal and have as much fun with my fun and funny little boys. And the final piece, as I remember, after hearing a sermon to pray for challenges, John and I united to do just that. I had been battling Crohn's disease since I was roughly 16 years old, but nothing came close to the door that we opened when we began to pray for challenges. My health was only one piece of the larger story. I referred back to the book of Job a lot and how God and Satan discussed the testing of Job. If you've never read Job, it's basically God and Satan are having a discussion, and Satan saying, if I tempt Job to do this, he's totally going to do it. And God is like, no, he is faithful. I know that he will not do that. So God basically gives Satan permission to test Job because he knows that Job is faithful. He was so confident that Job would endure whatever Satan threw at him because Job loved God so deeply. And I did too. I would not lose this battle, because if I gave up, that meant Satan won. And that's what Job taught me. No way was I going to allow myself to be defeated. With sheer determination, I knew that God would win. I didn't know what winning looked like, but I was resolved that God would win in my life story. I still marvel that Job was so firm in his belief, with no Bible, no scripture to encourage him, nothing to lean on. But I had Job's story. And God bless him, as I mentioned, I think in the last episode, even his wife was questioning him. And those pages of Job in my Bible are wrinkled and highlighted and dog-eared more than most pages in my Bible at all. Almost immediately after John and I united in prayer for challenges and fixed our feet firmly on the ground, did everything in our life hit the fan, including his choice to leave his very comfortable job. A job that provided financial security for our family and certainly comfort in a time when hospital bills were abundant. But we trusted blindly. We both knew that God was in control. God being in control didn't mean that it was going to be easy or pain-free. As Christians, we have never been promised smooth sailing, but we have been promised in Jeremiah 29:11 that, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future." John and I often came back to the fact that we prayed to challenge our faith at the same time, ironically, that I was praying personally for a testimony and to uncover what my life's purpose was beyond being a mom. Don't get me wrong. I think my role as mom and raising 3 little ones to know and love the Lord and be mighty men and leaders was the single most important job I had. But I was thinking long term. What and how would I make a mark on this earth with my faith? What does Penny bring to this world? What value did my life bring to the world for the greater good of my faith? I'm not sure I put those 3 testimony, purpose, trials together for many years as a trifecta. What did matter, and we needed many reminders, is that John and I were united in the challenges that we were about to come at from every direction. If I prayed for challenges, I had to be equipped to handle them. I survived on the prayers of family, friends, strangers, amazing doctors that truly cared about me, my praise and worship music that I cried myself to sleep with every night. I still depend on my praise and worship music. A strong faith that coupled with being incredibly stubborn and determined. If we prayed for this, we wholeheartedly wanted God to be glorified in the process. All of this is why I'm here, why I wrote a chapter in a book, why I have a website, and this podcast. Nothing brings me greater joy than to encourage people to never stop praying. I was sick for 25 years. I prayed for 25 years for healing when it seemed like there was no healing in sight. There were days I thought Crohn's would be my demise. There were days I begged for relief from the pain or pleaded to God to please let me be a healthy mom. But gratefully, I always depended more and more on my faith and on prayer as things got worse. Lean into your faith when things get hard. Don't run away or think for a second that God has abandoned you. The hard times are simply the times you really get to practice the faith that you profess you have. It's not easy. And above all, how tickled I get that before I even knew what a podcast was, let alone what I was going to physically endure, that God already had his plan marked out for me. While every bit of this surprise to me, it was never a surprise to God. He knew that I would eventually, albeit at a slow and stubborn pace, determine that I would start saying no to what cluttered my life and yes to the hard things. For me, hard things were writing for a book. I had never done that before. Hard things were starting a podcast. One thing I was absolutely positive I would never do. Everything about being here is a God wink and the great sense of humor that God has. Never say never. And now that I have once again set myself up to do hard things as God sees fit, much like praying for challenges, I find myself blabbing and sharing the most difficult times with the world, everything about the hardest and most painful pieces of my life, and loving almost every minute of it. So yes, I keep reminding myself I prayed for all of this, and I don't regret it one bit. The Lord first gave me a testimony to share, which became my life's purpose. He gave me the confidence to share that testimony, what he did for us, and comically, the way in which I am doing it is only God's sense of humor with me. The sweetest part is to know that my dad's mom, Gigi, with whom my sister and I spent every Friday night, wrote for the Dallas Morning News. She even started the travel section in the 1950s, a very risky project post-World War II when only the wealthy were traveling. But before that, she even began with a radio show in a small town in West Texas. She always talked to us about her guardian angels, and she did have some pretty impressive experiences with angels. To unintentionally be following in her footsteps by writing and, quote, broadcasting per se, is not only an honor, but a precious God wink of its own, a true joy for my entire family. So we're going to hit the blogs here a little bit. We left off last episode with I had no idea what was before me after my first surgery under the care of the wound care physician. While I gave a 10,000-foot view in the last episode and pieces of my final lap dropped in many of my episodes, my blog was my journal and my heart. It was where I could be most vulnerable as to the true depth of pain that I was desperately trying to overcome. Some things I didn't actually write because it was too hard to write, or I didn't want to remember, just basically didn't want to remember it, especially certain pieces of my journey. But most of all, I didn't get every detail down, not knowing that it bore any significance in the greater story that I had no idea that I would be telling today to you on a podcast. So I will try to fill in some gaps as we go that I remember. For several weeks after I returned home from my initial surgery to have my stomach removed, I remained pretty close to home, and I had been discharged from the hospital a week later than expected because I didn't mention this last time, but I had a reaction to vancomycin. It's an antibiotic called red man syndrome. I swelled up like a tick, and the swelling was so painful. On top of that, my skin turned bright red, thus the red man syndrome. The doctors seemed to have no idea what caused it at the time, and it wasn't until a few years later when I was asked what my reaction was when I told them vancomycin gave me a bad response, and I told them red man syndrome, that the doctor said, "Oh yeah, that happens when they try to push the IV antibiotic too fast." I was stunned. It was all completely preventable. Just one side effect, but one less pain in my side could have been prevented. I was also released from that hospital with increased white blood cell count and temperature spikes, a sure sign of infection, but they couldn't locate it. So basically said, "Oh, well, let us know how it goes." So the results of the red man syndrome were that once the swelling stopped and I got off the antibiotic and I went home, the redness in my skin went away. My skin had swollen so much in that time that it ultimately cracked. I'm trying to think of the best way to say it, but almost like an egg. It just cracked. And my entire body, I'm not kidding, peeled from head to toe. Huge chunks of skin at a time. As my home health nurse said, people paid a lot of money to get that kind of exfoliation. It was definitely the optimistic way to look at it. For anyone who knows me and knows how much I like gross things, you know that it was incredibly satisfying for me to peel 3 to 4+ inch chunks of skin at a time to expose just fresh, brand new baby skin underneath. To my husband, who found piles of skin on a towel next to me, maybe not so cool. But in hindsight, nutritionally, it has also been shocking to me that I had no dietary follow-up after having most of my stomach removed. As a healthcare practitioner, mind-blowing actually, I was eating a single grape for a meal. By the time that I arrived at the second hospital, 5 weeks after my surgery, my prealbumin levels were so low. And prealbumin levels, let me back up, are levels of protein that are made in your liver. And what's significant about prealbumin levels is they're kind of determinants of a patient outcome. So if your prealbumin is excessively low, your chances of recovery are kind of low. Or if they're more moderate or high, you have a greater chance of recovery. Yet, my body, as told by my physician, was Ethiopian starving. I was extremely low in prealbumin. I had very little protein in my body, and I would not heal on my own. So eating at home had been stressful, and as I progressed somewhat with my only soft food, I felt really, really bad after eating, and I always had to go back to bed every time. My calories were not substantial enough to keep a bird alive, but I couldn't eat more. I wasn't hungry, and feeling bad every time I ate didn't help at all. With my previous 2 abdominal surgeries, I was back at work by 6 weeks feeling pretty good, but I was heading into week 5 and my home health nurse had actually increased my wound care appointments to twice a day from once a day, and my entire incision was beginning to completely open. Very gross. From my pubic bone to my sternum, it was popping open. This had never happened to me in the past, and I had no idea what was going on. I watched my nurse's eyes as she cleaned my wound every day. I became really good at reading people's faces when they were messing with my wound because they're all up in my business and very close to me. She was poking around in my stomach twice a day, and I had a front row view of deep within my bowels, whether I liked it or not. She was amazing. Melanie learned her wound care skills from being an Army nurse, and she was good. And it was very obvious because when she had the day off, because most nurses panicked when they saw me barely cleaning my skin, let alone my wound. But sweet Melanie rarely left me to another nurse. For the entire 5 weeks I was her patient. She came to see me on weekends and days off. Ultimately, my surgeon credited her with saving my life by keeping my wound so clean. I could see she was growing concerned with each visit and frustrated that my initial surgeon was not returning her calls. So she arranged for me to visit a wound care specialist at a hospital that was just about 20 minutes from my house. It was now the beginning to middle of June, I'm guessing. School was out, but it was early in the summer. And I was still determined not to miss anything with my boys' end of school activities, beginning of summer plans. So I had started driving the boys to and from their activities for short trips as our parents were going home for longer recoups, bless their hearts. By the time I saw the wound care specialist, we were parent-free, and I was learning to slowly operate on my own, albeit very slowly. I just had to be home for my wound care appointments twice a day with my nurse. But just before my appointment with this new wound care doctor, Melanie had packed my wound before I left the house. Her entire goal for this wound care appointment and referral was for me simply just to get a wound vac, which I had never had before. But it helps keep your wound dry. It has like reverse suction, so it helps it to heal from the bottom up. I was all for it. When I arrived to the appointment, just an hour or so later, we, of course, began the process of removing all of the bandages that we had just placed on my stomach. Unpacking my wound was quite a process. It was the top and bottom of the wound that was initially open, so it was packed on each end after poking and prodding me in the most uncomfortable ways in my belly. And after packing each end and ultimately increasing my incision in size because it was popping open, my nurse then bandaged me up very securely so I can move about as needed for the day without any major problems. When the wound care doctor finally removed all of those bandages, she looked at my wound and she cocked her head. Remember, I'm studying their faces, but her eyes got really, really big. She took that awful Q-tip that felt like it was a mile long and shoved it up to my brain, starting from my pubic bone. She looked at the fluid from the Q-tip in the depths of my belly, and she took a very serious look at me. And I remember her so clearly saying, "Okay, who brought you here?" And I said, "I drove myself." And she said, "You mean you walked into the hospital alone? How are you even standing upright?" I had no idea what she meant, as I had been driving carpool for at least a week. I thought I was there just to get a wound vac. She had me sit up on the table, and she got eye to eye with me. With deep concern combined with total compassion, she asked, "Where do you live?" "Okay. Where's your husband?" "Okay. Penny, you have 2 hours. I want you to go home. I want you to pack a bag, and I want you to come directly back here. Come straight to my office. We are admitting you for infectious disease and a surgical consult. Do not be longer than 2 hours. Do you understand me?" I found out later that time was truly of the essence. My doctors had no idea why my organs had not yet begun to shut down for all the infection inside of me. And truthfully, I had infection all over all of my organs. For sure, count that as a miracle on our list. God was indeed protecting my thoughts because I really still had no sense of alarm. I called John at work. I told him about my appointment and that he met me at home and drove me back to Tomball Hospital, where I walked in like a person off the street. I always managed to look just fine, yet another small miracle, but also looking fine tended to decrease cause for alarm with doctors who didn't know me as well on some days when I was actually at my worst. So this is the beginning. So when I started these blog posts that I was trying to recount and rehash what happened, all the good things, I titled them God Moments, and then each subsequent post was God Moments and then one of the miracles. So the very first post that I made might be a little bit dry for the people who don't love anatomy, but it's really in-depth and interesting for those of you who want to know exactly what was going on in my body. So this is God Moments, the anatomical details. After this, then it gets really fun, but there are still many, many miracles that are packed into this little blog post here that I have kind of cut and paste from. But it provides a roadmap as to where I was and when I entered the second hospital. We originally thought that the infection had occurred because my open and non-healing incision had a bit of exposed mesh from a previous umbilical hernia repair that I had had years before, after I had my first son. Apparently, the mesh used is safe until it's exposed to the air, and then it can cause serious infection. Duly noted, the initial surgeon saw that mesh and said, that's going to cause you some problems, and did nothing about it. While this surgeon said, if I saw mesh, I would have you on the operating table in no less than 12 hours. So there's a difference in treatment. We went into surgery anticipating that the removal of this piece of mesh was going to change everything. But oh, how things changed. They removed the mesh without a problem. But having seen firsthand the amount of infection and that it was all over my organs, my doctor expressed the gravity of my situation. I'm pretty sure I blocked that out because I still thought that I was going back home pretty soon. There were pockets of fluid all over my insides that had become infected, or basically balls of abscesses. They were everywhere. He saw an area around what's called your duodenal stump. It's the duodenum is what comes out of your stomach where your food comes out. That looked really unhealthy and like a possible leak. This would explain actually how bad I felt after I ate. My food was literally leaking into my abdominal cavity, and infection began to build from that food running freely in my abdominal cavity. And when you say you're septic, that's basically you're just infected. So some people will say, oh, they got septic, but it was in their blood. Sepsis, it's just infection, and it's wherever it happens to be. My sepsis was inside my abdominal cavity because whatever was in my intestines was leaking out of my intestines where it should not be. He tried in the first surgery to replicate the leak with no success. He was very disappointed, but also very happy with how much of the infection they removed manually. They went in with CT results in hand, looked at the picture, and removed, scrubbed and flushed my abdomen, my organs over and over again to remove all the infection. He said that every single organ was washed and scrubbed. Infection was everywhere. They partially closed me up, partial because I did actually get that wound vac that I was after, which left the wound open enough to heal from the inside out. They were feeling like the greater infection was hopefully resolved, but still questioning that there was still a leak that could lead to more infection. Now, they were not convinced the mesh caused my issues at all. This was much bigger than mesh, and my expertise in reading doctors' faces was beginning to tell me that things were not going so well. I am not sure if I don't remember second surgery or if having 4 surgeries in 5 weeks, I just kind of have them all confused, but I'm fairly certain, checking my mom's notes and my notes, but that surgery number 2 took place because via a CT scan, there were still a few pockets of fluid that could potentially become abscessed if they weren't already. In the second surgery, they also found a small leak in my colon, which had never been operated on. They felt that it was always there, but it was there and it was so small at the time of the first surgery that it was difficult to isolate. They also still did not like the look of the duodenal bulb and discovered that a bile duct had also been cut. I was a world of mess. My new surgeon was very respectful of the previous surgeon and at least attributed the colon tear possibly to clamps that they used to hold my abdomen open during surgery. And I also believe that to be true, as my surgery wasn't anywhere close to my colon and I'm diseased. I have bad intestines, so I'm sure that my intestines, my colon, that was all brittle, so probably wasn't difficult to cause a tear. The other issues, the biggest issues we dealt with, I have a hard time believing to be related to clamping. The bile duct was really still in question, as they hadn't isolated which duct it was and if it was a smaller periphery or if it was the common bile duct, which would be a much greater issue. The duodenal bulb was so unhealthy, think gristle in a steak. He said it was so gristly that he couldn't even stitch it, and he could still not replicate a leak. At that point, I still don't place blame on the initial surgeon that caused the 3 nicks while removing my stomach. I had a belly full of scar tissue from 2 previous surgeries. I was frustrated with the initial surgeon at the lack of follow-up care, that he missed removing a staple from my belly. I didn't realize it till I got home. He did not return my nurse's phone calls, who was seeing me twice a day and had great concern for me. The first visit that I went to see him, I waited for 2 hours in the waiting room. It was absolutely brutal when I had not been sitting upright for weeks and I had to sit there in the waiting room waiting and waiting and waiting. And then his second follow-up visit was exactly the same. I had 0 nutritional care and just a general apathy to the obviously elevated concern for my life in one hospital and his releasing me with known infection weeks prior. He should have known better. Something was brewing, and he knew it, but bottom line, I was very sick, not from Crohn's at this point, but subsequent surgical complications, and there were still a lot of questions with no answers. They repaired all that they could, but they were still not confident that I was out of the woods. Surgery number 3 occurred when it did because of an excellent nurse. I kept saying, I smell myself. It was not a good odor, but one thing I was impeccable with was hospital hygiene. I work in a hospital. I know how stinky people get, and I was obsessed with being clean. So I washed my face. I brushed my teeth twice daily, both of them. My sweet friend had my hair washed, if not every day, every other day. I took sponge baths and carefully cleaned around every incision. But occasionally I just kept catching this whiff. And I asked whomever I was with, do you smell me? Because I smell me. And everybody just said no and just kind of rolled it off like it was nothing. I finally resolved I was just in my head and it wasn't there. But at one time, I had 4 drains across the bottom of my abdomen, down really close to my pubic bone. The kind that they say they don't hurt. No, they don't really hurt per se, but when I had 4 and they were poking through my abdominal muscles, every time I sat up, rolled over, moved a leg, or simply used my abs in any way, shape, or form, my muscles would spasm around the insertions of the tubes. The best way to describe it is like having 4 Charlie horses in your uterus all at once. I joked and called them my basket of eggs because when I had to stand up and move with physical therapy or go to the restroom, I had to gather them all together so they wouldn't get tugged because that tug would start a spasm. I had to protect my central line because Lord knows we didn't want to pull that out. And I had to walk with 2 IV pulls of antibiotics that were going through a PICC line and a connected wound vac that was rigged to the bottom of one of my pulls. Any tug in the wrong direction could spell a disaster for me. I had to find any way to stay lighthearted as I looked like a cactus, and miserable doesn't come close to how I really felt. I just had to crack jokes to stay sane. All the drains were draining well, except for one of the 4 that looked infected. It was draining a cloudy white color, which means infection. They really had their eye on that one. Every doctor that walked in was like, I don't like that one. So when I returned from a procedure and I turned to sit in a chair, something leaked out of the holes of the 3 healthy drains that were across my lower abdomen, something brown and something stinky. My nurse grabbed a gauze and excused herself to speak with the charge nurse. I knew what it was. Within moments, my surgeon walked in and said, we have to go back in. It was stool on that gauze, the nice way of saying poop, and it was freely moving about my abdominal cavity. I know, gross, sorry, but basically there was still a leak and we did not know where, and we had to stop the leak. At this point, I remember feeling so incredibly defeated and deflated. We had to find that leak, and my doctor kind of said, this is it. Like, we got to find it this time. And he was very concerned and somewhat teary that we couldn't locate it. He was frustrated and was running out of options. And I also was so tired and I was in so much pain. The thought of them opening up my incision for the 4th time, including my original surgery, just made me hurt even more. And I felt completely emotionally depleted. It ultimately ended up being a successful surgery. They never found the leak, but knew that it had to be coming from that nasty-looking, gristly duodenal stump area. So they used a special powder that acted like a cast or a super glue that would seal whatever microscopic leak was there until it could heal itself. They also scrubbed, and scrubbed again the area where the infectious drain was located and replaced that drain with a fresh one and a very sharp eye on that area to ensure that the infection was gone. In between those surgeries were so many tests: CT scans, HIDA scan, multiple blood tests a day, MRIs, another new drain insertion while awake, at least 8+, I don't even know, pints of blood that was infused, brutal potassium IVs. Has anybody had those? Those burn. They burn bad. And I was a hard stick. So getting IVs moved every couple days was not a walk in the park. I had IVs on the back of my arm near my triceps. I had them on my wrists. Horribly painful. It was awful. I couldn't bend my wrist. IVs were horrible. So it was not a walk in the park. And wound care just... oh my goodness, wound care. Oh, the wound care girls. They were so nice, but caused more pain than I could stand. And I had a lot of grit and tolerance, but I had to be pre-medicated with Dilaudid, which is the big guns, when they were on their way. And I was that patient that you could hear screaming down the hall. It was pretty traumatizing for everybody involved. I had to have a family member with me each time to hold my hand because it was brutal, nurses included. Pain meds didn't touch the pain. Not really sure why we even pre-medicated because it really made no difference. Monday, Wednesday, and Fridays were their days to visit and certainly not a part of the good things I want to remember. But those girls on the wound care team were so good. They encouraged me so much and I felt so confident in their skills and my healing wound every time they came for a dressing change. Sadly, after every surgery, we had to start all over again with wound care, but props to the wound care nurses. Their job is gross and almost always invoking pain on a patient who has had a wound for a very long time if they've made it to wound care. It just takes a very special person to be a wound care nurse. They are gifted in so many ways. They deserve a lot of kudos. So that ultimately sums up the state of my body and the anatomical details in general terms. It was rough. I tried hard not to think about it, but the vision of me was not one of a surviving patient. It was of a shell of a body barely hanging on to life with a fight that was only being sustained by my prayer warriors. While giving up sounded fabulous, There was never a moment I actually envisioned myself quitting. My kids 100% kept me motivated to keep pressing on. The notes and the messages and the visits from my closest of friends kept me focused on the long haul, my family being present at all times. I was never once left alone, night or day. Someone was always in my room to encourage me. I was scared. I had never been scared before in the hospital, and I was scared, so no one ever left me alone. So began the list of miracles we had no idea were miracles. God allowed me to have a naivety to protect me from the fear that I should easily have had given my medical background. The writing was on the wall, yet I simply focused on the praises, the miracles, the way God showed up every day, not only for me, but for my friends and family who cared so well for us at the time. So counting my miracles at this point, we had Army nurse Melanie, who literally, even doctors agree, saved my life because she did such an incredible job of cleaning my wound. Number 2, I was able to be with my boys for all of their end-of-year activities after I got out of that first hospital situation. Number 3, I walked into the wound care doctor with severe sepsis. Apparently, that's not a thing. Number 4, I fully believe, led to the doctors at this Tomball hospital who truly fought for my life. I do not believe that if I went back to my original surgeon, that they would have cared or fought as hard for me as this doctor and my team of doctors did at Tomball. Number 5, getting on IV nutrition actually saved my life by being so depleted in my nutrition and my protein being so low. I never, ever would have been able to heal myself. So getting to that hospital and getting on IV nutrition literally saved me. Number 6, my prayer posse. Prayers were overwhelmingly felt in my bones. I know this was full of many details that a lot of people probably don't want to hear, but I have to remind myself, not only am I here to share how I changed my life to be healthy, but I'm also here to encourage anyone going through the trenches of long-term illness as well. There were dark, dark days. These were the darkest and most difficult days of my entire Crohn's journey, and we dug in deep. If you are in the depths of despair, don't give up. Lean on your faith. Lean on prayer. Just say Jesus if you don't know what to say. How many times I just said Jesus. I did not have any words to say to pray for myself. If you have a friend or a loved one enduring anything similar, please share this with them. The medical model tells us basically to give up. They were telling me my chances were low of survival. In my case of sepsis, I not only needed the medical model, but the full backing of my faith-filled friends and prayer warriors. I was not strong, but I was never alone. The details above only set the stage for what happens next. And I promise you this, the next episode is already scheduled to drop tomorrow, so just keep the story rolling. It's not my story to keep for myself, as I was told by my minister. It's God's story that I was simply allowed to be the vessel that He worked through. His words, not mine, His healing for me to share. So the exact person who needs to hear it does get to hear it. Prayers for those who feel that they are at the end of their rope, that days cannot get any worse or more painful. I was there. Oh, how I was there. But God showed up. And I pray that for you. Until the next episode. Thank you so much for tuning in today. If you've enjoyed today's episode, hit that follow button, leave a 5-star review if you're so willing, and help spread the message of Becoming Natural by sharing it with a friend. Check out the resources in the show notes and join the email list to stay on top of all the latest and greatest happenings at Becoming Natural as we roll out exciting new things while we grow. Until next time, take those baby steps to a more natural life and always give yourself grace. Progress, not perfection, is the goal. See you next week. One of the best additions to my daily routine that shifted my understanding of holistic health was my USDA organic high-quality CBD oil. CBD is often misunderstood because not all CBD is the same. You do not feel this. This reputable family-owned company in North Carolina allowed me to get off opiates and live life without pain again. It is safe for ages 0 to 100 and can also help with joints, mood, sleep, future age-related annoyances, and so much more. You can check out my website at pennysampler.com, which includes $10 off your first order. I am incredibly passionate about sharing its benefits. If you would like personal assistance with selecting the products, please fill out the simple health assessment quiz in the show notes.